Have you ever felt like God is a distant figure, separated from your daily life by an unbridgeable chasm? Like your prayers are messages sent into an empty void, with no certainty they're even being received? What if I told you that the greatest spiritual misunderstanding of our time isn't about what God wants from you, but about where God actually is? This fundamental misconception has kept countless sincere seekers trapped in a cycle of spiritual frustration, constantly reaching outward for what has always been present within. Has this ever happened to you? You face a crisis, perhaps a health scare, financial trouble, or relationship conflict, and immediately begin praying intensely, begging God for intervention, yet feeling that divine help remains frustratingly out of reach? You're not alone. This experience is nearly universal because we've been taught to look in the wrong direction entirely. The revolutionary understanding I'm about to share with you today transforms not just your spiritual practice, but every aspect of your daily life. The kingdom of heaven, that divine reality we've been seeking, is not a distant realm waiting for us after death. It's not a reward for good behavior or spiritual achievement. It is, as Joel Goldsmith profoundly taught, a state of consciousness that exists within you at this very moment. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the globe, and if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might fundamentally change your entire relationship with God, prayer, and spiritual living. When you truly grasp that the divine presence isn't something you need to reach for, but rather recognize as the very essence of your being, prayer transforms from desperate pleading to joyful acknowledgement. Imagine approaching each day not as a separate entity struggling through life alone, but as a living expression of divine consciousness. Picture facing challenges not with fear and anxiety, but with an unshakable awareness of the perfect spiritual reality that exists beyond material appearances. This isn't positive thinking or wishful spirituality. It's practical mysticism that produces tangible transformation in your health, finances, relationships, and inner peace. The practice I'll be sharing today has changed countless lives across the world, not through magical thinking, but through a profound shift in spiritual understanding. What would your life look like if you stopped begging an external deity to change your circumstances and instead awakened to the divine reality that already exists within you, perfect and complete? How would your experience transform if you recognized that in the kingdom of heaven within your consciousness, there is no lack, no disease, no separation from good? In the next few minutes, I'll walk you through 5 practical steps that allow God to live through you in everyday situations. These aren't abstract concepts, but tangible practices you can begin implementing today, even with whatever level of spiritual understanding you currently possess. If these teachings on living from kingdom consciousness resonated with you, subscribe to join our community of spiritual seekers who are practicing this recognition in their daily lives. Each new video explores practical ways to experience the divine presence within. The first step in this profound journey is what Joel Goldsmith called the practice of the presence, developing a continuous awareness of this inner kingdom that exists within you. This isn't something complex or esoteric. It begins with simple recognition throughout your day. When you wake each morning, before your feet even touch the floor, pause for just a moment and silently acknowledge, the kingdom of heaven is within me right now. This divine consciousness is my true nature. This tiny decision creates ripples of transformation that extend far beyond that moment. It establishes a mindset that shapes how you'll respond to everything the day brings. The hidden truth most spiritual seekers miss is that consistency matters more than intensity. A brief recognition practiced regularly has more impact than occasional hours of desperate spiritual effort. Throughout your day, especially during challenging moments, take even 30 seconds to return to this inner kingdom. When your boss criticizes your work, when traffic makes you late, when unexpected bills arrive, these are precisely the moments when this practice reveals its power. Instead of reacting immediately from fear, frustration, or lack, pause and recognize the truth that exists beyond material appearances and circumstances. You'll begin noticing subtle shifts at first, a deeper peace in stressful situations, unexpected solutions to persistent problems, a growing sense of divine guidance in daily decisions. These are signs that you're beginning to live from kingdom consciousness rather than purely from material awareness. The revelations unfold gradually, but their cumulative effect transforms your entire experience of life. Now, I want to go even deeper into how this understanding applies to specific challenges we all face. Consider health issues, an area where fear can instantly overwhelm our spiritual awareness. When physical symptoms appear, our conditioned response is panic, followed by exclusively seeking material solutions. Please understand, this isn't about rejecting medical wisdom or practical care. The journey I'm describing integrates both spiritual understanding and appropriate action. When facing health challenges, first turn within to recognize the spiritual truth. In the kingdom of heaven within you, there is only wholeness, only divine perfection. This recognition doesn't replace medical care, but opens a channel for healing power that transcends material limitations completely. From this place of spiritual awareness, you can then make decisions about treatment with clarity rather than fear. Think about someone with chronic pain who's been told they'll simply have to live with their condition. From material consciousness alone, this prognosis feels like a prison sentence. But from kingdom consciousness, they recognize that physical appearance isn't the final reality. Their spiritual essence remains whole regardless of bodily conditions. This recognition creates space for healing that might otherwise be blocked by fear and resignation. This approach creates a partnership between spiritual understanding and practical wisdom. You don't ignore symptoms or avoid doctors. You simply bring a different consciousness to the situation. You address physical needs while maintaining awareness of spiritual wholeness. This dual approach provides both material and spiritual resources for healing and well-being. If you've experienced moments where you sense there's more to reality than what appears on the surface, write in the comments, "I recognize the kingdom within." Now, this understanding extends far beyond personal healing. The same profound shift in consciousness transforms our relationship with money and material supply. When confronting financial challenges, most people immediately focus on external actions, working harder, cutting expenses, or frantically searching for new income sources. While practical steps matter, the mindset behind those actions determines their effectiveness. The breakthrough insight is returning to the consciousness of the inner kingdom where divine supply is infinite and eternally flowing. Let me share something behind the scenes of financial transformation. A businessman I worked with faced complete financial ruin after his partner embezzled company funds. Creditors were demanding payment, legal troubles multiplied daily, and bankruptcy seemed inevitable. Rather than focusing solely on these external circumstances, he began practicing kingdom consciousness each morning and throughout his day. At first, nothing external changed. Bills still arrived, creditors still called, but something shifted internally. The paralyzing fear that had blocked creative solutions began dissolving. From this awareness, right action emerged naturally. He found himself making different decisions, having conversations he would have avoided before, exploring options that fear would have previously ruled out. Within weeks, opportunities appeared that he couldn't have engineered through external manipulation. A former client offered a substantial new contract. An unexpected settlement came through. A strategic partnership materialized. These weren't random coincidences, but consciousness demonstrating its own abundance. The pathway to complete financial recovery opened up, not through force or struggle, but through spiritual recognition and understanding. This journey of transformation requires something many modern spiritual seekers resist: patience. In our world of instant results, we expect immediate spiritual breakthroughs. The hidden truth is that this transformation develops gradually over weeks and months of practice. You won't master this understanding overnight, and that's perfectly natural. Joel Goldsmith himself spent years developing this consciousness through meditation, study, and practical application. What matters is that you begin today with whatever level of understanding you currently possess. The consistency of your practice matters far more than its initial perfection. Some days you'll maintain kingdom consciousness beautifully. Other days you'll forget completely and spend hours in anxiety before remembering the kingdom within. This inconsistency isn't evidence of failure, but the normal rhythm of spiritual development. Consider how a child learns to walk. There are many falls for each successful step at first, yet with persistence, walking eventually becomes effortless. The same principle applies to spiritual awareness. Each time you return to kingdom consciousness after forgetting, you're strengthening that awareness. The path isn't linear. It includes plateaus and even apparent setbacks, but the overall trajectory moves toward increasing spiritual recognition. The profound impact comes in recognizing that you aren't creating this kingdom through positive thinking or willpower. You're simply recognizing what has always existed within you, waiting for your awareness. This revelation transforms spiritual practice from effortful self-improvement to joyful discovery of your true nature. If you've ever experienced the frustration of spiritual growth seeming too slow, write in the comments, "I'm embracing divine timing." The beauty of this practice becomes even more evident when we consider how it transforms our relationships with others. One of the most beautiful aspects of this spiritual journey is learning to recognize the subtle transformations that signal your growing awareness. While we often look for dramatic breakthroughs or miraculous interventions, the true revelations come in quieter moments. As you practice returning to kingdom consciousness, notice the subtle shifts first. A deeper peace in situations that would have previously triggered stress, unexpected solutions appearing for persistent problems, and a growing sense of divine guidance in daily decisions. These might seem like small changes, but they represent a fundamental shift in perspective. You're beginning to live from kingdom consciousness rather than purely from material awareness. It's like learning to see with new eyes. The world hasn't changed, but your perception of it has transformed completely. Where you once saw only problems, you now recognize opportunities. Where you once felt separation from good, you now experience divine presence. A woman in our community described this shift beautifully. After practicing kingdom consciousness for several months, she realized one day that her constant anxiety about the future had been replaced by a quiet confidence. Not because her external circumstances were more secure, they weren't, but because her awareness of the inner kingdom had become more consistent. This didn't mean she never experienced fear or worry again, but those emotions no longer dominated her consciousness or dictated her decisions. To continue this journey of spiritual discovery together, hit that subscribe button below. I'm committed to sharing these transformative principles in ways that you can apply immediately to your relationships, work, and inner peace. The secret pathway to experiencing these subtle shifts is persistence through the initial challenges. This is where many spiritual seekers stumble. They begin this practice with enthusiasm, expecting immediate dramatic results. When those instant miracles don't materialize, they conclude the approach doesn't work and abandon it prematurely. The critical insight is understanding that spiritual development follows natural laws, just as physical growth does. Think about planting a garden. When you place seeds in soil, nothing visible happens immediately. For days or even weeks, you see no evidence of growth. If you grew impatient and dug up the seeds to check on them, you'd interrupt the very process you're trying to foster. Spiritual practice works similarly. The initial work happens beneath the surface of your awareness, creating a foundation for visible transformation that appears in divine timing. Those who persist through this initial phase discover something far more valuable than instant gratification, an inner resource that sustains them through everything life brings. They develop a spiritual resilience that isn't dependent on circumstances being perfect. They find an unshakable peace that remains steady even when external conditions fluctuate wildly. A businessman shared with me that after 6 months of consistent practice, he faced a crisis that would have previously sent him into panic and despair. Instead, he found himself responding from kingdom consciousness automatically, without the effort it had required earlier in his journey. The practice that had once seemed difficult had become his natural state. This represents the maturation of spiritual awareness. What begins as conscious effort gradually becomes spontaneous expression. If you're committed to discovering the kingdom within, regardless of how long it takes, write in the comments, "I'm in this for the long journey." Now, let's explore how this kingdom consciousness transforms our relationships with others in ways that create harmony where conflict once dominated. Perhaps the most profound transformation occurs in our relationships with others. Think about the people who challenge you most. That coworker who constantly criticizes, the family member who triggers old wounds, or the stranger who cuts you off in traffic. Our instinctive reaction is defensiveness, judgment, or withdrawal. But kingdom consciousness offers an entirely different pathway. When interacting with difficult people, the breakthrough insight is recognizing that the divine presence exists within them too, perfect even when obscured by stress, fear, or fatigue. Their behavior may not reflect this spiritual reality, but that doesn't diminish its truth. This recognition isn't about excusing harmful actions, but about seeing beyond the surface to the deeper reality. Imagine returning home after a challenging day to find your partner irritable and distant. From material consciousness, you'd likely react defensively or withdraw emotionally. But from kingdom consciousness, you recognize that they're dealing with their own challenges, that the divine presence within them remains perfect even when obscured. This recognition allows you to respond with compassion rather than escalating the tension. I witnessed this transformation in a corporate environment where 2 executives had been locked in conflict for months. After one began practicing kingdom consciousness, the entire dynamic shifted. Rather than reacting to perceived attacks, she began seeing her colleague through spiritual eyes, recognizing the pressure he was under and the divine intelligence operating even through his challenging personality. Without a single conversation about their conflict, the relationship transformed as her perception shifted. The revelation many spiritual seekers miss is that living from kingdom consciousness doesn't mean escaping daily challenges, but meeting them from a spiritual foundation. This isn't about floating above human experience in some mystical bubble. It's about engaging fully with life's complexities while maintaining awareness of the spiritual dimension behind all appearances. The authentic journey includes both successes and setbacks. Some days you'll maintain spiritual awareness beautifully throughout challenges. Other days you'll fail completely and spend hours in anxiety or anger before remembering the kingdom within. This inconsistency isn't evidence of failure, but the normal rhythm of spiritual development. Just as a child learning to walk falls many times before mastering the skill, your spiritual awareness strengthens through both successes and apparent failures. Behind the scenes of spiritual growth, each return to kingdom consciousness after forgetting builds neural pathways that make this awareness increasingly natural. What initially requires conscious effort gradually becomes your default perspective. The businessman who once struggled to maintain spiritual awareness for even minutes eventually finds it becoming his natural state throughout the day. The decision to practice kingdom consciousness transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for spiritual recognition. Washing dishes becomes a meditation on divine presence. Traffic delays offer space for inner communion. Challenging conversations become invitations to see beyond appearances to the spiritual reality within others. Life itself becomes your spiritual practice. If you've experienced those moments when spiritual awareness suddenly breaks through in the midst of ordinary activities, write in the comments. I recognize divinity in the everyday. The true beauty of this practice emerges when we observe how it gradually transforms our entire experience of life. Over months and years of dedicated practice, something truly profound begins to shift in your experience. The kingdom consciousness that once required deliberate effort becomes increasingly natural, like learning a language that eventually allows you to think in it rather than mentally translating. You'll notice that you automatically return to spiritual truth more quickly after being momentarily pulled into material. Fear or concern. This isn't something you force. It's the natural evolution of consistent spiritual recognition. Think of it as building momentum on a journey. Those initial steps require the most energy, but as you continue forward, you develop a rhythm that carries you naturally. A friend described this experience beautifully, saying that after a year of practice, she realized that her first thought in challenging situations had shifted from panic to peace, not because she was trying to be spiritual, but because kingdom consciousness had become her default perspective. The evidence of this transformation appears in practical ways throughout your life. Solutions to problems appear more readily because you're accessing the infinite intelligence of the kingdom within, rather than relying solely on limited personal thinking. Peace becomes more consistent because it's anchored in spiritual reality rather than fluctuating circumstances. Relationships deepen because you're interacting from authentic spiritual awareness rather than ego needs and defenses. The hidden revelation that transforms this journey is letting go of expectations for immediate dramatic results. Our culture conditions us to expect instant transformation, the spiritual equivalent of before and after photos on a weight loss program. But consciousness doesn't transform that way. The changes unfold organically, often so subtly that you don't notice them happening in real time. You may not even recognize the cumulative effect until you look back after 6 months or a year and realize how profoundly different your life has become. The person who constantly worried about money now experiences steady financial flow. The one who struggled with chronic anxiety now navigates daily challenges with consistent peace. The one whose relationships were conflicted now enjoys authentic connection. These aren't changes you manufactured through positive thinking or sheer willpower, but the natural demonstration of consistently recognized spiritual truth. A business executive in our community had practiced kingdom consciousness for nearly 2 years when he faced a company crisis that would have previously sent him spiraling into anxiety and reactive decisions. Instead, he found himself responding with clarity, creativity, and confidence that surprised even him. Later, reflecting on the experience, he realized that no single dramatic breakthrough had occurred. Rather, thousands of small recognitions had gradually transformed his entire mindset. This represents the authentic path of spiritual development, not spectacular leaps, but steady, consistent recognition that accumulates into profound transformation. The process resembles the changing of seasons rather than the flipping of a light switch. You don't create these changes through force or mental manipulation. You simply allow what already exists in consciousness to express itself through your experience with increasing clarity. If you've noticed subtle but meaningful changes in how you respond to life's challenges after consistent spiritual practice, write in the comments, "I see the gradual unfolding." Now let's explore how this kingdom consciousness transforms your creative expression and work life in ways you might never have imagined. One of the most remarkable transformations occurs in your professional life. As kingdom consciousness becomes your natural state, work shifts from being merely a means of survival to an authentic expression of divine creativity flowing through you. This isn't just a nice spiritual idea. It manifests in tangible ways that transform your entire relationship with your career or business. A designer in our community described this shift beautifully. Where she once struggled for inspiration, constantly fighting creative blocks and deadline pressure, she now experiences a natural flow of ideas because she's tapped into infinite intelligence rather than relying solely on personal ability. Her work became not just more productive but more fulfilling, an expression of spiritual essence rather than ego achievement. The behind-the-scenes revelation is how this consciousness transforms your relationship with challenges. Obstacles that would have previously overwhelmed you begin to feel like interesting puzzles to solve from spiritual awareness. A project deadline that once triggered anxiety now becomes an opportunity to witness divine ideas emerging in perfect timing. A difficult client interaction that would have sparked defensiveness becomes a chance to recognize the kingdom within both yourself and the other person. This doesn't mean work becomes effortless or that challenges disappear. Rather, you meet those challenges from an entirely different mindset. You're operating from abundance rather than scarcity, from creative possibility rather than limitation, from spiritual partnership rather than isolated struggle. The impact of this shift extends far beyond productivity metrics to transform the very quality of your daily experience. Now I want to go even deeper into what may be the most significant breakthrough on this journey. As kingdom consciousness matures through consistent practice, you discover something precious beyond measure, an unshakable peace that doesn't depend on circumstances being perfect. This isn't positive thinking or emotional bypass. It's authentic spiritual awareness that remains steady through life's inevitable fluctuations. This peace becomes your foundation through every challenge, loss, and disappointment. When financial setbacks occur, you still take practical action, but without the paralysis of fear. When relationships face difficulties, you address them directly, but without the drama of emotional reactivity. When health concerns arise, you seek appropriate care, but without being consumed by worry about outcomes. A woman who had practiced kingdom consciousness for several years faced the unexpected loss of a spouse. Friends were amazed at her response, not an absence of grief, but a profound peace that coexisted with natural sorrow. She described knowing, beyond intellectual understanding, that the kingdom of heaven within had proven itself faithful through the darkest experience of her life. This wasn't resignation or spiritual bypassing, but direct experience of spiritual reality, transcending even death itself. This represents the maturation of spiritual understanding, moving from conceptual knowledge to lived reality. You know from direct experience that spiritual consciousness is the only reliable foundation because you've tested it through real-life challenges. Material conditions fluctuate constantly, but inner truth remains eternally steady. This doesn't make you immune to human emotion, but provides a deeper context for those emotions, like waves on the surface of an ocean that remains undisturbed in its depths. If you've experienced moments of inexplicable peace, even amid difficult circumstances, write in the comments, "I've felt the kingdom's steadiness." The pathway to this transformation requires something that most spiritual seekers are unwilling to give: consistent commitment, regardless of immediate results. Let's be honest about what this path truly requires. The transformation we're discussing demands a level of commitment that most spiritual seekers are unwilling to make. This isn't a weekend workshop or a 21-day challenge that produces instant enlightenment. It requires daily practice, even when you feel absolutely no immediate results. Faith in spiritual truth when material appearances seem to contradict it completely. And patience through the sometimes painfully gradual development process. Joel Goldsmith taught this path to thousands of students worldwide throughout his ministry. Some experienced dramatic breakthroughs within months. Others worked diligently for years before significant changes appeared visibly in their experience. A few grew impatient and abandoned the practice when immediate miracles failed to materialize. The decisive factor wasn't spiritual talent or divine favoritism, but simple persistence. The willingness to continue recognizing spiritual truth regardless of apparent results. This commitment represents a fundamental paradigm shift in our approach to spiritual growth. Our culture has conditioned us to expect immediate gratification in every area of life, from instant downloads to same-day delivery. We bring this same expectation to spiritual practice, wanting instant enlightenment or immediate healing. The revelation that transforms your journey is accepting that spiritual development follows natural laws that cannot be rushed or circumvented. Just as an oak tree requires years to reach its full stature, consciousness unfolds according to its own divine timing. The profound insight is that you're standing at a choice point right now. You can dismiss this teaching as interesting philosophy, but too impractical for your busy, complicated life. You can try it half-heartedly for a few weeks and then abandon it when results don't match your expectations. Or you can commit to genuine practice with patience for gradual transformation. This decision will shape not just your spiritual journey, but every aspect of your life experience. Now, I want to offer perhaps the most liberating truth of all. You can begin right now, exactly where you are, with whatever understanding you currently possess. You don't need to master complex theology or achieve perfect meditation first. You don't need special spiritual credentials or decades of study. The kingdom of heaven is within you right now. It has always been there. It will always be there. Your recognition doesn't create it, but reveals what already exists eternally. Simply start today, this moment, by recognizing as often as you remember, the kingdom of heaven is within me now. Divine presence is my true nature. Spiritual perfection exists in consciousness regardless of material appearances. Practice this recognition in the morning, throughout challenges, before sleep. Be patient with yourself through the inevitable inconsistency. Celebrate small victories. Learn from temporary defeats. What makes this approach uniquely powerful is that it doesn't require you to change who you are or adopt artificial spiritual behaviors. It simply invites you to recognize your true nature that has always existed beneath the surface of material appearances. Every time you turn within to acknowledge this spiritual truth, you're removing another layer of illusion that has kept you imprisoned in limitation and fear. If you're ready to begin this journey of recognition today, write in the comments, "I acknowledge the kingdom within." The most important aspect of this practice is understanding how to integrate it into your everyday life in practical, tangible ways. As we draw this conversation to a close, I'm reminded of something profound that Joel Goldsmith often emphasized: spiritual truth isn't meant to be held tightly as intellectual knowledge, but shared openly as lived experience. Your journey of recognizing the kingdom within doesn't happen in isolation. It ripples outward and touches countless lives around you. If these teachings have resonated with something deep within you today, I'd love to hear about your own experiences in the comments below. Simply write, "The kingdom within awakens," so I know you've journeyed with me to the end of this exploration. Your story might be exactly what another seeker needs to hear to begin their own practice of recognition. If you found value in this perspective on letting God live through you, consider gently tapping that like button, not for algorithms or metrics, but as a way of affirming that spiritual truth still matters in our distracted world. It's a small gesture that helps others discover these timeless principles. And if you're feeling called to continue this journey of spiritual discovery together, subscribe to join our growing community of seekers who are committed to recognizing the divine presence in everyday life. We're exploring these profound truths every week, translating mystical understanding into practical living. There's a video right here about practicing the presence throughout your day that builds beautifully on what we've discussed today. Click and continue with me over there as we explore how to maintain spiritual awareness through the specific challenges and opportunities of daily living. Until next time, remember, the kingdom of heaven is within you right now, waiting only for your recognition.
My friends, there comes a moment in every seeker's life when the old way of living can no longer sustain us. A moment when we discover, often through struggle, that no amount of human planning, no amount of personal effort, no amount of mental striving has given us the peace, the harmony, or the fulfillment we have been seeking. And so we arrive here, not by accident, not by chance, but by an inner impulse, an impulse of the Spirit itself, drawing us to a deeper truth. You see, the great turning point of the spiritual life is not the moment we decide to become better people, nor the moment we adopt new practices, nor even the moment we dedicate ourselves to prayer. The true turning point comes when we awaken to the startling realization that we have been trying to live life through a self that was never equipped to live it. The personal sense of self, that little me that worries, fears, plans, controls, has tried to carry the entire burden of existence upon its shoulders. And because it is limited, because it is finite, because it was never the source of life, it has inevitably come to exhaustion. Now, I want you to hear this clearly, because the world has missed it. The spiritual path does not begin when you try harder. It begins when you can no longer continue as you have been. It begins when you realize that there is a presence within you that has been waiting patiently, silently, lovingly for you to step aside. A presence that does not need your strength, that does not require your intelligence, that does not depend upon your human understanding. A presence that is the very life of God, the very life of Christ, expressing itself as your consciousness. And so in our time together, we are going to explore what actually happens deep within the chambers of your being when you finally allow this presence to take its rightful place. When you cease living from the personal mind and begin living from the Christ mind, when you stop striving to make life work and begin resting in the life that already is, not theory, not philosophy, but the actual experience of the divine living, its life as you. If you can receive this, if you can hear it, not with the intellect, but with that inner listening that responds to truth, something will begin to shift even now. For when truth is spoken, the Christ within each of us recognizes itself, and in that recognition, transformation begins. Now, let us move deeper into this principle. For before we can understand what it means to let Christ live our life, we must first see clearly what has been living our life until now. And this, perhaps more than anything else, is the great stumbling block in spiritual realization. our unexamined identification with a self that is not the self. From early childhood, we are conditioned to believe that we are a separate being, an isolated mind, a vulnerable body, a personal identity struggling to survive in a threatening world. We learn to say, I must do this, I must achieve that, I must protect myself, I must make my life work. And without noticing it, we become prisoners of this personal I, this finite sense of self that is constantly planning, worrying, resisting, defending. But the personal self is not your true identity. It is not the Christ. It is not the divine. It is not the presence that Jesus spoke of when he said, I and the Father are one. It is in truth a mental image, an accumulation of beliefs, memories, fears, and reactions. It has no spiritual substance. It has no divine authority. It has no reality in the kingdom of God. And yet, this is the self we have been living from. This is the self we ask to solve our problems. This is the self we expect to guide us, protect us, heal us, and supply us. And then we wonder why life feels heavy, why fear clings to us, why peace eludes us. We wonder why our prayers seem unanswered, why our spiritual efforts bear so little fruit. The answer is astonishingly simple. We have been attempting to live life through a self that is not alive in God. The separate self has no access to the infinite because it is built upon the belief in separation. The personal mind cannot touch the divine because it is formed out of the very belief that the divine is somewhere else. So listen carefully. All fear arises from the illusion of separation. All lack arises from the illusion of separation. All sickness, all anxiety, all striving arise from the illusion of separation when you believe yourself to be a separate entity, living by your own power, sustained by your own strength. You place yourself outside the kingdom of God, not in truth, but in your own perception. And from that moment on, life becomes a struggle because the self you are living from is disconnected from the source of life. But the miracle is this. The separate self is not something you must conquer or improve. It is something you need only see through. The moment you recognize its unreality, its power dissolves. The moment you perceive that it is not the one living your life, it falls away like a shadow disappearing before the sun. And in that instant, a new awareness begins to dawn, an awareness not born of effort, but of revelation. There is another self within you, a self that is whole, complete, infinite, untouched by human limitation, a self that is not separate from God because it is the activity of God itself. This is the Christ. This is the one true self. This is the life that is waiting to live as you. And so now, having looked upon the nature of the personal self, we must turn to the reality that has always been present behind it. The reality the world has called Christ, though the world has seldom understood what that word truly means. If we are to let Christ live our life, we must know what Christ is, not intellectually, not theologically, but as inner recognition. In the infinite way, when we speak of Christ, we are not speaking of a person. We are not referring to a historical figure, though such a figure may have embodied the principle. We are speaking of the divine presence, that is the true identity of every individual on earth. The Christ is the light of God expressing itself as your consciousness. The Christ is the fullness of divine life, living you, breathing you, sustaining you. The Christ is the truth of your being unborn, undying, untouched by human circumstance. It may help to see it this way. Just as the sun shines whether the clouds appear or not, so the Christ shines as the essence of your being whether the personal self recognizes it or not. When the clouds thicken, clouds of fear, guilt, self-judgment, or worldly belief. The light seems hidden, but the Christ remains just as radiant, just as present, just as whole. You have never lived a moment without it. You have never taken a breath apart from it. The Christ is not something you acquire, it is something you discover. Now, hear this with the inner ear. Christ consciousness is not a higher level of your personal mind. Christ consciousness is the absence of your personal mind. It is the state in which the personal I, with all its fears, ambitions, doubts, and demands, grows quiet, and the divine I begins to reveal itself. It may help to see it this way. Just as the sun shines whether the clouds appear or not, so the Christ shines as the essence of your being whether the personal self recognizes it or not. When the clouds thicken, clouds of fear, guilt, self-judgment, or worldly belief, the light seems hidden, but the Christ remains just as radiant, just as present, just as whole. You have never lived a moment without it. You have never taken a breath apart from it. The Christ is the truth of your being unborn, undying, untouched by human circumstance. This presence does not reason. It does not fear. It does not struggle. It does not pray to God, for it is the activity of God. It does not seek supply, for it is the outflow of infinite supply. It does not heal, for it is the wholeness that reveals the unreality of disease. When you touch this presence, even briefly, life begins to reorient itself. The mind grows quieter. The heart feels lighter. You no longer feel alone in the universe. You no longer feel responsible for the entire burden of existence. You begin to sense that there is a divine rhythm, subtle, gentle, but unmistakable, moving your life forward with infinite intelligence. And the most important truth of all is this. This Christ, this presence, this divine consciousness is not waiting to enter your life. It is waiting to be recognized. It is the reality that has been living you from the beginning, but the personal self has stood in front of it like a curtain blocking the sunlight. Pull back the curtain, and you discover that the light was there all along. So, when we speak of letting Christ live your life, we are speaking of removing nothing and adding nothing. We are speaking of a shift from illusion to truth, from separation to oneness, from personal effort to divine expression. We are speaking of the revelation of what you have always been. Now, having glimpsed the nature of the Christ within, we come to one of the most sacred moments in the entire spiritual journey, the moment of surrender. Not the surrender the world imagines, not defeat, not resignation, not the giving up of hope. No, the surrender we speak of in mystical practice is entirely different. It is the quiet realization that the personal self has no role in the divine life that is unfolding as you. There comes a time, perhaps you have already felt it, when all the effort, all the struggle, all the attempts to improve, correct, or control your experience reach their limit. You discover that no matter how sincere your striving has been, it has not opened the gate to peace, and in the exhaustion of that striving, something holy begins to take place, a softening, a release, a willingness to stop leaning on your own understanding. This is the moment when the inner voice whispers, I cannot do this anymore. And far from being a failure, that whisper is the beginning of grace. For in that very admission, you cease trying to live life according to the laws of the personal mind, and you enter the atmosphere where the Christ can reveal itself. You see, the personal self tries to make things happen. The Christ allows things to unfold. The personal self reacts to conditions. The Christ stands still in the presence of conditions. The personal self fears the future. The Christ lives in eternal now. The personal self seeks protection. The Christ is protection. When you come to the end of the personal self, when it can no longer carry the burden, you are not falling into emptiness, you are falling into God. You are falling into the arms of the presence that has been carrying you since before you drew your first breath. And what makes this surrender sacred is that it is not something you perform. It is something that happens to you. It is not something you force. It is something you allow. This surrender may come as a deep breath that loosens the chest. It may come as a moment of stillness in the midst of panic. It may come as a sudden recognition, I don't have to figure this out. It may come as an inner voice saying, be still and know. But however it comes, it always carries the same fragrance, the fragrance of rest. Not the rest of inactivity, but the rest of trust. Not the rest of escape, but the rest of realization. The rest that comes when the false sense of self yields and the true self begins to shine through. And let us understand this clearly. Christ does not enter your life because you surrender. Christ is revealed because surrender removes the veil. Christ has been living your life all along, but the personal sense of self has been pretending otherwise. The moment you stop trying to live life through the personal mind, a subtle, quiet presence begins to emerge. You feel guided without thinking. You feel supported without asking. You feel carried without effort. You begin to sense that something within you, yet greater than you, has taken over the activity of your life. This is the first taste of letting Christ live your life. This is the beginning of the inner shift. This is the dawn that precedes the full light of realization. And now, my friends, we enter the sacred territory where the spiritual life ceases to be theory and becomes experience. For when the personal sense of self grows quiet, when the mind relaxes its desperate grip upon life, something begins to take place within you, something subtle, yet unmistakably real. It is the dawning of a new state of consciousness, the emergence of the Christ that has always been the truth of your being. This shift does not announce itself with fanfare. It does not come with lightning or excitement. It comes gently, so gently that the personal mind almost misses it. In fact, it is often recognized only in hindsight, when you look back and realize that something in you has changed, though nothing external seemed to bring about that change. The first sign is often a deep, unexplainable stillness, not the stillness of inactivity, but the stillness of an inner atmosphere, quiet, spacious, luminous, a sense that something within you has stopped struggling. You may still have the same circumstances, the same challenges, the same responsibilities, but they no longer feel as heavy, as urgent, as threatening. Something within you has shifted from reaction to recognition. Then there arises a second sign, a clarity that does not come from thinking. You find that guidance emerges of itself. You know what to do without effort. You respond without premeditation. You speak words you did not plan. You take steps you did not analyze. And afterward, looking back, you say, I did not think of that. It was given. This is the activity of Christ in you, the divine intelligence expressing itself without the interference of the personal mind. A third sign appears in the form of effortless right action. Actions unfold without strain. Tasks you once resisted become smooth. Decisions that once paralyzed you become simple. This does not mean that life becomes free of events. It means that the events no longer dominate your inner equilibrium. There is a divine rhythm moving through your affairs, and you feel yourself carried by it. Then, without your trying, without your affirming, without your visualizing, there begins to emerge a loosening of fear, not because the circumstances have changed, but because something within you knows with quiet certainty that you are not living by your own power. Fear loses its foundation when the sense of separation dissolves. The Christ, being infinite presence, has no fear, and when Christ is allowed to live your life, fear fades like a shadow retreating before the morning light. And one day, you become aware of something even more subtle, a feeling that you are not the one doing the living. You are watching life unfold, watching the actions take place, watching the words form, watching the path open before you, and yet you know that these are not the products of personal striving. They are the expressions of a deeper self. This is the inner shift. This is the beginning of the life lived by the Spirit. This is what takes place when the Christ begins to assume its rightful place as the life, the mind, the activity of your being. You do not make this shift happen. You do not earn it. You do not control it. It arises naturally the moment the personal I steps aside, even slightly. The Christ that has always been present begins to show, self first gently, then steadily, then undeniably. And with each moment of recognition, the old identity grows weaker and the new identity grows clearer. This is the beginning of a life that is no longer lived for God, but from God. Not for the purpose of gaining good, but as the expression of good. Not as an effort to solve life, but as the revelation that life is already solved in God. Now, it is one thing to taste this inner shift in moments of meditation, in periods of stillness, in quiet hours when the world recedes. But what does it mean to live from Christ consciousness? To carry this awareness into the activities, the relationships, the responsibilities, and the challenges that make up daily living? For mysticism, true mysticism, is not an escape from life. It is the discovery of a higher life revealing itself through your ordinary life, a divine life expressing through human conditions, a spiritual rhythm moving through the most practical moments of your day. And so we begin by noticing what happens in our relationships. When Christ lives your life, you no longer approach others as personalities difficult, demanding, flawed, or admirable. Instead, you begin to sense that each one you meet is an appearance of the same divine presence that lives as you. You may still see their behavior, you may still notice their words, but you are no longer reacting to those surface elements. You are responding from a center of recognition, and in that recognition, the Christ in you beholds the Christ in them. This does not mean you condone unkindness or ignore injustice. It means you no longer meet darkness with darkness, personality with personality, fear with fear. You meet it with presence. You meet it with the awareness that only the Christ is real. And gradually, you find your reactions softening, your words arising from compassion rather than defense, your interactions becoming less entangled in egoic patterns. Peace begins in the moment you cease defending the personal self. Then we look at work, at our daily tasks and responsibilities. When the personal mind governs your work, it becomes a burden. You push, you force, you calculate, you strain. But when Christ lives through you, your work becomes an avenue of expression for divine intelligence. Ideas appear without effort. Solutions arise before the problem fully forms. Actions flow naturally. You begin to notice that what you once dreaded now unfolds with ease, not because the task has changed, but because the doer has changed. For mysticism, true mysticism is not an escape from life. It is the discovery of a higher life revealing itself through your ordinary life, a divine life expressing through human conditions, a spiritual rhythm moving through the most practical moments of your day. Then we turn to the realm that troubles most people, finances and supply. When you live from the personal sense of self, money becomes a source of fear because you believe that it is supply. You believe that your well-being depends upon conditions, accounts, opportunities, or individuals. But when Christ consciousness begins to live as you recognize that supply is not money. Supply is the activity of God appearing as form. Money becomes a channel, not a source. And Because the source is infinite, the channels are endless. This does not mean that money mysteriously falls from the sky. It means that fear dissolves because you no longer place your trust in the outer form, you trust the inner reality. And as fear dissolves, clarity arises. Opportunities unfold. Directions become obvious. You take steps you would not have considered before, not from desperation, but from inspiration. And you find that your needs are met not by struggling for them, but by recognizing that supply has always been spiritual. Then we consider health, another area where the personal self often trembles. The personal mind looks to the body and sees vulnerability, fragility, decline. It tries to fight symptoms, resist conditions, battle disease. But Christ consciousness does not fight disease. It does not oppose the appearance of illness. It simply rests in the truth that divine life is the only life, and that this life, being perfect, cannot express as imperfection. Healing, then, is not the correction of the body, it is the correction of identity. As you recognize yourself as the life of God, wholeness begins to reveal itself, not through conflict, but through recognition. This is what it means to live daily life from Christ consciousness. You do not withdraw from the world. You do not transcend responsibility. You do not float above daily experience. You remain in the world, but you are no longer of it. You move through life with a center that is not shaken by appearances. You speak from a depth that does not depend on circumstance. You act from a wisdom that is not your own. You love with a heart that is not personal. And gradually, your entire life begins to reorganize itself, not because you change the outer world, but because you change the level from which you live. This is the beginning of divine order expressing itself in your affairs. This is the beginning of a life lived not by effort, but by grace. Up to this point, everything we have spoken of may sound peaceful, harmonious, even beautifully simple. And indeed, the spiritual life is simple, divinely simple. But simplicity does not mean the personal mind will surrender without resistance. In fact, the moment you begin to shift your identity from the personal self to the Christ within, you will encounter certain misunderstandings, certain doubts, certain subtle forms of resistance that must be understood, not fought, not feared, but recognized for what they are. Let us speak first of impatience. The personal self has been conditioned for results. It lives by cause and effect. It measures, it judges, it evaluates progress, and so when you begin to walk the spiritual path, that same tendency quietly enters your practice. You find yourself thinking, I have been seeking the presence for days, weeks. Why has nothing changed yet? But you see, the very question reveals the old consciousness at work. Christ does not come because you practice. Christ is revealed because the personal sense of self relaxes. And that relaxation cannot be hurried. It unfolds according to grace, not impatience. Then there is the desire to use Christ consciousness for personal gain. This is subtle. Perhaps you say, now that I know the truth, I will use it to heal this condition, to attract this supply, to resolve this problem. But the moment you attempt to use the Christ for a personal purpose, you have returned to the personal self, for the Christ has no personal purpose. The Christ is the presence of God, and God does not serve human will. Truth cannot be used. Truth can only be yielded to. So long as you try to make God act, you are still outside of the kingdom of God. Another resistance is doubt, especially when outer appearances seem unchanged. The personal mind looks at the world and says, if nothing has improved, nothing spiritual is happening. But remember, appearances are the last to change. Consciousness changes first. silently, invisibly, often without any emotional fireworks. When a seed is planted, nothing appears above the soil for some time, yet beneath the ground, life is already stirring. So it is with spiritual realization. The Christ often works in depths your mind cannot perceive, preparing the outer world for a shift that may seem sudden, but is the result of inner transformation long underway. There is also the temptation to fall back into effort, especially when life becomes challenging. You begin to feel the pressure of circumstances, and without noticing, you slip into the old patterns, trying to fix, trying to plan, trying to force, trying to control. But this is the moment when you must be most watchful, most gentle with yourself, not scolding the mind, not condemning yourself for slipping, but simply returning quietly, humbly to the awareness that Christ is living the life, not you. And perhaps the greatest resistance of all is the belief that you are unworthy. Many a sincere seeker says, "Surely this truth is for the advanced, the holy, the chosen. Surely I cannot expect such grace." But this thought is the final veil of the personal self, for the Christ in you has no sense of unworthiness. The Christ does not look at your past, your mistakes, your human frailties. The Christ knows only one thing: I and the Father are one. And when you hear that, even faintly, even for a moment, you are already beginning to transcend the old identity. The key is always the same. Do not fight the resistance. Do not argue with the mind. Do not attempt to conquer doubt or impatience or fear. Simply recognize them as movements of the personal self and let them pass. Return gently and again to the awareness that there is a presence within you greater than the mind, a presence that does not resist, does not fear, does not demand, a presence that knows how to live your life because it is your life. When resistance arises, it is not a sign of failure. It is the sign that the personal self senses its dissolution and clings to what is familiar, but it cannot endure. The light of Christ inevitably dissolves every shadow. And now we come to the heart of the mystical life, the summit toward which every step of the spiritual path has been leading. For all the practices, all the recognitions, all the moments of surrender are preparing you for one great realization, the realization expressed in the words, "I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life." These words, spoken by Paul, repeated by mystics across centuries, are not poetry, they are not metaphor, they are the literal description of what takes place when the false sense of self dissolves and the true self begins to shine unobstructed. You see, the personal I is never truly alive. It is a shadow, a concept, a bundle of conditioned thoughts. It cannot live because it has no life in it. But the Christ, the presence of God individualized as you, is life. And when the personal self yields, even for a moment, you begin to experience something astonishing. Life begins to live itself. Actions take place, words are spoken, steps are taken, without the weight of self-consciousness, without the strain of personal will, without the burden of seeking results. The first time this happens, you may not even notice it. Perhaps you find yourself responding with kindness in a moment when the old self would have reacted with irritation. Perhaps you speak words of clarity that surprise even you. Perhaps you take an action that feels effortless, inevitable, guided, and afterward you realize, "I did not do that. Something moved through me." That something is not foreign to you. It is your very self, your divine self, finally unobstructed by the noise of the personal mind. As this realization deepens, life begins to reorganize itself. You discover that inspiration comes before thought. Guidance arises before planning. Harmony appears before effort, and outcomes unfold without anxiety. This is not passivity. It is participation in a higher order of life. This is not the abdication of responsibility. It is the discovery of the true source of responsibility. This is not the loss of individuality. It is the unveiling of divine individuality. For when the Christ lives your life, something profound occurs. You no longer experience yourself as the center of existence. You experience God as the center and yourself as the expression of that center. You cannot explain this to the intellect. You cannot analyze it or pin it down. It is as if an inner door opens, and instead of you living your life, life, capital L, begins to flow through your being like a river moving through an unobstructed channel. You wake in the morning not with dread or duty, but with a quiet expectancy. What is the Father expressing today? You speak not to be understood or approved, but because the words arise naturally. You act not out of compulsion or pressure, but because the next step reveals itself effortlessly. And perhaps the most beautiful sign of this realization is the disappearance of fear, not because you are protected from harm, but because the one who feared no longer claims identity. Fear belongs only to the personal sense of self. The Christ has no fear, for it knows nothing exists outside of its own infinite presence. In this state, healing is no longer an event you seek. Healing is the inevitable consequence of abiding in wholeness. Supply is no longer something you chase. Supply is the natural expression of infinite abundance. Harmony is no longer a goal you work toward. Harmony is the inner order of divine life showing forth in form. You are no longer striving to become spiritual. You are realizing that you have never been anything else. I live, yet not I. That is the death of the false identity. Christ liveth my life. That is the birth of true individuality. This realization is not achieved through discipline or force. It is not the result of spiritual ambition. It comes quietly, naturally, inevitably, when you rest in the truth of your being, when you stop trying to think or feel your way into God and allow God to be the self that lives. And once you taste this truth, even briefly, you know without doubt, without argument, without explanation, that the personal self has never been your identity. The Christ has always been living your life. You simply did not recognize it. Now you begin to recognize it. Now you begin to live from it. Now you begin to understand that the life you call my life is God's life, appearing in a form that bears your name. This is the fullness of realization. And so, my friends, we come to the close of this particular message, though in truth there is no close, for the spiritual life has no beginning and no ending. It is the continuous unfolding of divine consciousness, the eternal revelation of the Christ within. What we have spoken of today is not something to be remembered, nor something to be practiced as a human being attempts a technique. It is something to be recognized quietly, gently, faithfully, in the depths of your own being. Everything you have ever sought, peace, supply, harmony, health, purpose, has been hidden only by one illusion, the belief that you were the one living your life. When that belief dissolves, even a little, the presence takes its rightful place, not as an addition to your life, not as a helper alongside your efforts, but as the very life itself. The Christ is not someone you invite. It is the reality you uncover. If there is one practice I would leave you with, it is simply this. Before you begin your day, before you check your phone, before you consider your tasks or responsibilities, take a moment, just a moment, and turn within. Not to think something, not to repeat something, simply to acknowledge Father, you are the life that is living me. Or if those words resonate differently for you, Christ is the only self I am. This recognition does not need force. It does not need belief. It requires only sincerity. One sincere moment of recognition carries more transformative power than hours of mechanical meditation. For when you acknowledge the presence, even briefly, you loosen the grip of the personal sense of self. You create an opening through which the Christ expresses itself more freely. Throughout the day, return again and again, not as a discipline, but as a remembering, a brief pause, a quiet breath, a gentle inner turning, just enough to recall that you are not the doer, not the thinker, not the one upholding your existence. You are the instrument through which the divine is expressing its infinite activity, and in time, without your effort, without your will, without your strain, you will discover that life has become different not because circumstances have dramatically changed, but because you have changed. Your center has shifted from the personal to the universal. The false I has grown quieter. The true I, the Christ, has begun to take its rightful place. This is the grace of the spiritual path. This is the fruit of recognition, not the remaking of your life, but the revelation of your life as it truly is. God in expression, God as your consciousness, God as your being. May you come to see that the kingdom you have been seeking is already within you. May you feel the presence going before you, making the crooked places straight. May you rest in the assurance that the life you call mine is the infinite life of God. And may the Christ, the living presence within you, reveal itself more fully each day until you can say with complete inner certainty, I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life.
Imagine for a moment that everything you've ever criticized in another person was actually a mirror held up to your own consciousness. Every harsh word, every silent condemnation, every they should know better was really you, struggling with something unresolved within yourself. What if Jesus wasn't giving us a moral rule when he said, "Judge not"? What if he was revealing the secret to inner freedom? My friends, we come together today not to add another burden to your shoulders, but to lift one off, a burden so heavy, so exhausting, that most of us don't even realize we're carrying it. It's the burden of judgment. When Jesus spoke those transformative words, "Judge not," he wasn't delivering a commandment in the traditional sense. He was revealing a spiritual principle, a law of consciousness as exact as any law of physics. He was showing us the pathway to our own liberation, the nature of judgment. What is judgment, really? It's the human mind believing it has the wisdom to evaluate, condemn, or approve of another's spiritual journey. It's the ego presuming to know what God alone can know. Every time we judge another person, we're essentially saying, I know better than the divine intelligence that created this being. But here's the mystical truth that sets us free. When you judge another, you're not really seeing them at all. You're seeing your own state of consciousness projected outward. The critical thought you have about your neighbor, that's your consciousness speaking about itself. The condemnation you feel towards someone's choices, that's revealing what's unreconciled within you. This is why Jesus connected judgment so directly to our own experience. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. This isn't punishment, it's spiritual law. The consciousness that condemns outside must experience condemnation within. The mind that criticizes others lives in a state of self-criticism. The illusion of separation, we judge because we believe in separation. We see ourselves as distinct, separate entities with the right and ability to evaluate other separate entities. But this is the grand illusion. In spiritual reality, there is only one life, one consciousness, one divine presence expressing itself infinitely. When you understand this, really understand it in your innermost being, judgment becomes impossible. How can the ocean judge one of its waves? How can the sun condemn one of its rays? You are that inseparable from every being you encounter. The practice of spiritual discernment. Now, some will say, but surely we must discern right from wrong. We must have standards. Yes, but discernment and judgment are entirely different faculties. Discernment is wisdom, judgment is condemnation. Discernment says, this action brings harmony, that one brings discord. Judgment says, this person is wrong, bad, or less than. Jesus himself demonstrated this perfectly. He discerned the consciousness of those he met. He saw through human appearances to spiritual reality, but he never condemned the person. Neither do I condemn thee, he told the woman caught in adultery. He was demonstrating a consciousness so elevated that it could witness human failings without judging the individual. Your divine assignment, here's your spiritual assignment, and it's the most liberating work you'll ever do. Begin to catch yourself in the act of judgment. Not to condemn yourself for judging, that would just be more judgment, but simply to notice. Ah, there's a judgment. And in that moment of awareness, ask yourself, what is this judgment revealing about my own consciousness? When you find yourself critical of someone's materialism, ask yourself where you're still attached to material things or afraid of not having enough. When you judge someone's anger, inquire into your own unexpressed anger. This isn't psychotherapy, this is spiritual alchemy. You're transmuting the lead of judgment into the gold of self-awareness. Living in the sacred now, as you practice this release from judgment, something miraculous happens. You begin to live in what I call the sacred now, a state of consciousness where you meet each person fresh, without the overlay of past conditioning, without the projection of your opinions and beliefs. In this state you can actually see people, not your idea of them, not your story about them, but their true spiritual nature. This is seeing through the Christ consciousness, and it changes everything. Where you once saw a difficult person, you now see a divine being having a human experience. Where you once saw failure, you now see a soul learning and growing. The freedom that awaits, my dear friends, when you truly stop judging others, you'll discover something wonderful. You've stopped judging yourself. The inner critic falls silent. The constant measuring and evaluating ceases. In its place comes a peace that truly does pass understanding. This is the promise Jesus held out to us, not as a distant reward, but as a present reality available the moment we shift our consciousness. When we stand before another human being and pass judgment upon them, we believe we are seeing them clearly, objectively, as they truly are. We think our criticism is accurate, our assessment is fair, our condemnation is justified. But this is one of the great illusions of human consciousness. In truth, when you judge another person, you are not seeing them at all. You are seeing yourself. Every judgment you make is a mirror held up to your own consciousness. The faults you so readily identify in others are the very qualities that live, often unexamined, within your own mind. The behaviors that trigger your harshest criticism are frequently the shadows you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. When you declare someone else to be arrogant, dishonest, or selfish, you are confessing what occupies your own mental and emotional landscape. This is not a matter of psychology or personal opinion. This is spiritual law. Consciousness cannot perceive what it does not contain. You cannot recognize a quality in another unless that quality exists somewhere within your own awareness. The thief sees theft everywhere. The liar suspects everyone of lying. The jealous person imagines jealousy in every relationship they observe. Consider how this operates in your daily life. You meet someone, and within moments you have catalogued their flaws, their weaknesses, their failures. You have judged their appearance, their manner of speaking, their choices, their character. And you feel certain that your assessment is objective, that you are simply seeing reality as it is. But what you are actually doing is projecting the contents of your own consciousness onto them. You are using them as a screen upon which to display your own fears, insecurities, and unresolved conflicts. The tragedy is that the person you judge may walk away completely unaffected by your silent condemnation, while you must carry the weight of that judgment indefinitely. It becomes part of your mental atmosphere, your emotional climate, the very air you breathe. You have imprisoned yourself with your own thoughts, built walls with your own criticisms, created separation with your own condemnations. The mirror of judgment always reflects back upon the one who holds it, and what it shows us is not the other person's reality, but our own consciousness staring back at us. The greatest spiritual truth that Jesus demonstrated throughout his ministry was this: he saw divinity where others saw only humanity. He perceived the Christ presence where others perceived only sinners, tax collectors, prostitutes, and outcasts. This was not naive optimism or willful blindness to human error. This was spiritual vision, the ability to look beyond the temporary manifestation of human behavior to the eternal reality of divine being that exists in every soul. When we operate from ordinary human consciousness, we see only appearances. We see the mistakes people make, the limitations they exhibit, the darkness they seem to carry. We become fixated on their past actions, their current struggles, their apparent failures, and in seeing only this surface reality, we miss the profound truth that lies beneath. Every person, regardless of their behavior or circumstances, is an expression of the infinite divine consciousness. The Christ dwells within them just as surely as it dwells within the saint. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of spiritual awakening learning, to see past the human drama to the divine reality. It requires a complete transformation of perception. You must train yourself to look at the alcoholic and see the Christ temporarily obscured by addiction. You must look at the angry person and recognize the divine presence momentarily clouded by pain. You must look at the one who has harmed you and acknowledge the God-self that exists beneath their unconscious behavior. This doesn't mean you condone harmful actions or pretend that destructive behavior is acceptable. It means you develop the capacity to hold two truths simultaneously. Yes, this person is acting from unconsciousness, and yes, the divine presence still resides within them. Yes, their behavior may be unacceptable, and yes, their essential nature remains untouched by their actions. Yes, they may need correction or consequences, and yes, they are still worthy of recognition as spiritual beings. When you develop this Christ vision, something extraordinary happens. You stop reacting to people from fear, anger, or superiority. You begin responding from a deeper place of understanding and compassion. You can still maintain boundaries, still protect yourself, still speak truth to error. But you do so without that poisonous energy of condemnation that judgment always carries. You see the person as they truly are in spiritual reality, even while acknowledging where they currently stand in human experience. The human mind is constantly busy with the exhausting work of evaluation. From morning until night we assess, criticize, approve, and condemn. We judge the driver who cuts us off, the co-worker who speaks too loudly, the politician whose views differ from ours, the family member who disappoints us. We carry these judgments like heavy stones in an invisible bag, accumulating more weight with each passing hour, each passing day, each passing year. What we fail to recognize is that every judgment we hold is a chain that binds us. Every criticism we maintain is a lock on our own prison cell. We think we are merely observing reality, expressing valid opinions, or protecting ourselves from harm. But in truth, we are creating our own captivity. The mind that constantly judges is never at peace. It cannot rest. It cannot be still. It is forever scanning, evaluating, finding fault, and building cases against the world and everyone in it. True spiritual freedom begins the moment you release your need to judge. Not because someone has commanded you to stop, not because it's the morally correct thing to do, but because you finally recognize that judgment serves no purpose except to keep you imprisoned in a state of separation and conflict. When you let go of the compulsion to evaluate everyone and everything around you, a space opens within your consciousness, a vast, peaceful space where love can enter, where understanding can flourish, where compassion can flow freely. This liberation doesn't happen through force or willpower. You cannot judge yourself into not judging. The freedom comes through recognition, through seeing clearly that the judging mind is the suffering mind. Every time you release a judgment, you feel lighter. Every time you choose not to condemn, you breathe more easily. Every time you look at another human being without mentally cataloging their faults, you experience a moment of genuine peace. And here is the beautiful paradox. The less you judge others, the less you judge yourself. The compassion you extend outward inevitably flows inward. The mercy you offer to another becomes the mercy you receive. The freedom you grant to others by releasing your judgments of them becomes your own freedom. You discover that you were never really judging them at all. You were judging life itself, and in doing so, judging your own existence. When judgment falls away, what remains is the natural state of your being, open, free, at peace, and capable of genuine love. At the deepest level of reality, there is no separation between you and any other living being. This is not poetry or metaphor. This is the fundamental truth of existence. We are all waves in the same ocean, rays of the same sun, expressions of the same infinite consciousness. What appears as separate individuals, each with distinct personalities, histories, and destinies, is really the one divine presence manifesting in countless forms. When you truly grasp this truth, judgment becomes impossible, for how can you condemn another without condemning yourself? Yet judgment thrives on the illusion of separation. It requires us to believe that we are fundamentally different from those we judge, that we are over here and they are over there, that we are good and they are bad, that we are enlightened and they are ignorant, that we are worthy and they are not. Every judgment we make reinforces this false sense of division. It builds invisible walls between ourselves and others, creating a world of isolation where everyone stands alone, separate, competing for worth and value. This separation is perhaps the greatest source of human suffering. When you judge another, you cut yourself off from the flow of divine love that seeks to move through you. You cannot simultaneously condemn someone and remain connected to the universal consciousness that embraces all. You cannot hold yourself apart in superiority and experience the joy of unity. You cannot build walls of judgment and expect to feel the freedom of boundless connection. The spiritual journey is really a journey from separation back to unity, from the illusion of division back to the recognition of oneness. Every time you judge another person, you take a step backward into isolation. Every time you release judgment and recognize the divine presence in another, you take a step forward into the truth of your being. You remember that their struggles are your struggles, their pain is your pain, Their awakening is your awakening. You are not separate observers of each other's lives. You are participants in the same eternal dance of consciousness discovering itself. When this recognition deepens in you, compassion arises naturally, not as something you must force yourself to feel, but as the inevitable response to seeing truly. How can you be harsh with another when you recognize they are you in a different form? How can you condemn when you understand that their unconsciousness is the same unconsciousness that has at times clouded your own awareness? The illusion of separation dissolves, and what remains is the simple, profound truth: we are one. The judgments we carry are rarely about the present moment. They are accumulated residue from the past old grievances, remembered slights, catalogued failures, and stored disappointments. When you judge someone today, you are almost never seeing them as they actually are in this moment. You are seeing them through the lens of yesterday, last week, last year, or even decades ago. You are relating to a memory, not to a living, breathing, evolving human being who stands before you now. This is one of the most tragic aspects of judgment. It freezes people in time. It takes someone's worst moment and declares it to be their eternal identity. It takes a mistake they made years ago and insists that this mistake defines who they are today. The person may have grown, changed, learned, and transformed, but your judgment refuses to acknowledge this possibility. You hold them captive to their past, and in doing so, you hold yourself captive as well, unable to experience the freshness and possibility of the present moment. True spiritual awakening requires that we meet each person fresh, as if for the first time, without the heavy baggage of previous assessments. This doesn't mean we forget everything or ignore patterns of behavior. It means we remain open to the possibility that this moment is new, that consciousness is always evolving, that transformation is always possible. When you approach someone without dragging along your accumulated judgments, you create space for a genuine encounter. You allow them to be who they are now, not who they were then. Living in the now means releasing the need to maintain your catalogue of other people's faults. It means letting go of the stories you've constructed about who they are and what they're capable of. It means meeting this moment with open eyes and an open heart, willing to be surprised, willing to be wrong about your previous conclusions, willing to see something you've never seen before. This is where freedom and judgment cannot coexist. Judgment keeps you locked in the past, endlessly reviewing and reinforcing old conclusions. Present moment awareness dissolves judgment naturally because you're too busy experiencing what is to worry about what was. When you're fully present, you discover that the person before you is as new as this breath, as fresh as this moment, as full of possibility as the unfolding now. The past loses its grip, judgment falls away, and you find yourself capable of relating to others with a clarity and compassion you never thought possible. My dear friends, we have journeyed together through one of the most transformative teachings ever given to humanity. We have explored how judgment imprisons us, how the Christ presence lives in all beings, how freedom comes through releasing our need to condemn, how separation is illusion, and how the present moment dissolves the chains of past assessments. But now you must ask yourself, what will you do with this understanding? Will. These words remain mere concepts, pleasant ideas to consider and then forget. Or will you allow them to penetrate your consciousness so deeply that they transform the way you see every person you encounter? The teaching is simple, but the practice requires vigilance. It requires awareness. It requires a willingness to catch yourself in the very moment judgment arises and choose differently. You will not become perfect at this overnight. You will stumble, you will judge, you will forget. But each time you remember, each time you choose to see the Christ instead of the error, each time you release condemnation and embrace recognition of divine presence, you take one more step into freedom. Remember this: the world does not need your judgment. It has plenty of that already. What the world desperately needs is your vision, your ability to see past appearances to reality, to recognize the divine spark even in the darkest places, to offer the gift of non-condemnation that creates space for transformation. When you stop judging others, you don't become passive or weak. You become powerful with the power of love. You become clear with the clarity of truth. You become free with the freedom that only comes from releasing the need to evaluate, condemn, and separate yourself from your fellow human beings. So I leave you with this: begin today. Begin now. Begin with the very next person you encounter. Look at them not with the eyes of judgment, but with the vision of Christ. See them not as their mistakes, but as their divine essence. Meet them not with your accumulated opinions, but with the freshness of present moment awareness. And as you do this, as you practice this daily, hourly, moment by moment, you will discover that you are not just changing how you see others. You are transforming your entire consciousness. You are awakening to who you truly are. You are living the teaching that Jesus gave us: judge not. This is your path. This is your calling. This is your freedom. Go now, in peace, and see with new eyes.